Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Harmon Museum Lunch and Learn for February on this beautiful February morning. My name is John Zimkus. I am the Education Director and Historian here, and I want to welcome this record-breaking crowd. We haven't had a crowd this big since pre-COVID for a Lunch and Learn, and we want to thank you all for being here. Speaking of record crowds, I don't know if how many of you took advantage of this, but we did have the American Battlefield Trust American Revolution Experience in our gallery, our Semendinger Gallery, for about a month. We were the first place in the country to have that. Texas had one. There was two going around the country, and Texas had one about 2 weeks after us. Ours has now been packed up and sent to Georgia. Theirs has now been packed up and sent to North Dakota. But we want to thank the Turtle Creek chapter of the DAR for helping get that for us. And we also want to thank the Sons of the American Revolution and Miami Valley Gaming for supporting us. It was a great exhibit, but also great is that we had in 1 month's time 1,574 people go through the museum, which is phenomenal. It really is. As many of you know, we have a fantastic museum here, but usually people tell us how good it is, but usually it's followed by, I've lived in this town for so many years and I've never been here before. So this brought an awful lot of people. Not only that, but we had people from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and even Iowa came to see this. So that was phenomenal. We got some great things going on. We have a new exhibit in our Semendinger Art Gallery, which will begin on February 23rd, at the end of this week. It'll be exhibits from our collections, some somewhat overlooked or not very well-known things we have, both large and small, and I think you'll enjoy that, and that'll be up there until March 8th. After that, we're going to have an art exhibit of Ohio the Beautiful by Chuck Marshall, the finest landscape artist in Ohio today. And we'll have, he's from this Southwest Ohio, and we will have a number of his beautiful paintings here. And that will be in March 15th through April 27th. We have our continue Music at the Museum, which will be on March 14th. We're going to have Fintan, which is an Irish pub band, and also a sing-along as part of that. Extremely popular. Our last Music at the Museum was the McKeons, Scottish folk songs, and we had some 83 people. The exact number of people we have here today came to that. So if you are interested in that Music at the Museum concert, it's $15 for adults, $10 for seniors, and $5 for students. And that will be on March 14th. It'll be at 7 o'clock. It's a Thursday, I believe. Isn't that correct? Yes. So Thursday. So that would be a great thing to take advantage of. We also have exhibits, an art thing for students. And I have so many papers here, I can't find it. It's going to be silhouettes about Harmon Arts. It'll be stylish silhouettes. It is on Saturday from 1 to 2:30 on March 16th, and it'll be open up for students from 5 to 14, and they can see how the old art of silhouettes were done. We have some great silhouettes in our collection, which I'm sure they will see at that time, but also that'll take place on March 16th. As far as lunch and learns go, The next one after this will be Easter decorations through the years with our good friend Linda Martin. She is in the middle table right here. If you have been here before, you've heard me say this, but we first discovered, if you will, Linda about 3 or 4 years ago when she said she had Halloween decorations and went back 50, 60, 70, 80 years, maybe even more. And then it was a fantastic exhibit. She had well over 100 here on tables and hanging up on screens. And then when that was over, she said, "Oh, by the way, I've got Christmas decorations." So a year later, we had Christmas decorations, and it was once again fantastic. And lo and behold, after that, she said, "Did I ever tell you I have Easter decorations?" So we have, this is all going to go on, and this will be on March 20th. It'll give her husband a chance to clean that part of the basement. And it'll be Easter decorations through the years. On April 17th, 3 days short of when Charles Dickens, the anniversary of Charles Dickens coming through Ohio and Lebanon, we're going to have Dickens visit America and Lebanon, Ohio, in his own words. We're going to have what I've been referring to as the Harmon Museum Historical Players. We're going to, 90% of what you will hear are actual words, either by Charles Dickens, his secretary, a man from Boston named George Washington Putnam, his wife, reporters talking about them, about what it was like in 1842 when Dickens came to America for the first time and made his way as far west as St. Louis, as far south as Richmond, and went through Warren County on the 20th of April of 42 and ate at what is now the Golden Lamb, and he didn't like it. I will tell you that, well, Dickens will tell you that story. On May 15th, Jeannie Dries, our assistant director, our head exhibit creator, and a half a dozen other jobs she has. She has, if we put all her titles on her door of her office, it would be going onto the floor. But she's going to be talking about, and we just came up with this title about an hour and a half ago, The History of Cloth to Die For. So we'll be talking about early items that were used to dye cloth, the struggles of getting that item, the expense of getting those items. Then we're going to have on June 19th, I will be lucky enough to be your speaker. 2024 is the 230th anniversary of the birth of Tom Corwin, Warren County's most famous individual from the 19th century, and it could be argued perhaps one of the most important in the entire history of Warren County. Nephew of Lebanon's town founder, he was a governor, a U.S. senator, secretary of the Treasury, minister to Mexico, prosecuting attorney of Warren County, and also one of the greatest wits and greatest public speakers of his day prior to the Civil War. And we'll be talking about the wit and wisdom of Tom Corwin. On July 17th, we're going to have Suzanne Anderson Taylor. I was going to call her a young teacher. She just became a grandmother. But I had her as a student teacher. So to me, she's young. And she was our speaker 2 years ago with letters from Paris about her grandmother's pen pal from Paris just before World War II, and what he was writing and telling her what's going on and why doesn't America get involved and that sort of thing. Then last year we had her do one of the things she loves to talk about as a teacher at Lebanon High School, the coronation of a king in the United Kingdom. And so just around the same time Charles was crowned, she was talking about all the robes and all the ceremonies and all the things that will take place. She's going to be talking about letters from California. I believe it was her grandfather, a great-grandfather. I may be wrong there, but it was a relative who well over 100 years ago, went to California, how he was struggling out there, met a young lady from South Dakota. They fell in love, and how they eventually made their way back to Ohio. So it should be a very, very interesting series of Lunch and Learns coming up in the months to come. So enjoy your meal, and in a half hour or so, we will have our speaker. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again to the Harmon Museum's February Lunch and Learn. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian here. Our speaker today is Donna Summers. She has not been a stranger to us for many, many years. She has been a hard-working volunteer and also the curator of two of our finest displays. One of them is the Armstrong Gallery of Flight, which is just to your right and my left. She does have somewhat of a relationship, minor as it may be, with Neil Armstrong. She did go study engineering at the University of Cincinnati, and while Neil Armstrong was teaching there. And the story she told me once, she was looking quite puzzled at the syllabus for the class she was taking. He was not her instructor, but he said, "Are you confused?" And she said, "Yeah, well, it looks daunting," or something of that nature. He says, "Don't worry, it's our job to make it clear to you." And she was very much impressed with that. I don't know if that's why she went on for further education at Purdue, his original college, but we'll say it is why she went there. She's also the curator of the mid-century modern room, which for most of us here is either our childhood house or the house when you first got married. But she plays house with that about once a month. She changes everything around. It's now Halloween. It's now Christmas. We're going on a vacation, or we're going to play this board game or that board game. So she has a lot of fun working there. She is the author of 4 textbooks under the name Donna Summers. But she's also the author of probably over a dozen postcard mystery books under the name of Carol Tennyson. One of the first was See No Evil. I don't know if you recognize the picture on this, but this is the old Shaker Inn motel on 42 going down toward Mason. So she often throws in things about, so this one is, like I said, See No Evil. There is Hear No Evil, which also involves the space program and somehow Lebanon, Ohio, and Neil Armstrong. Yep, there you go. There is, one of them I'm proud of is because I did help her. All of the books she writes under Carol Tennyson are historically accurate. They're historical fiction, but they have accuracy in them. The Westerner. I mentioned Tom Corwin. I'm speaking about him in June. There you go. His granddaughter, Carol Corwin Sage, married James Madison Burns, the recipient of the Medal of Honor during the Civil War. And it is, once again, a murder mystery, but information about their wedding, which took place about 2-3 blocks to the west of us, is in the book, and many other things. And I was very, very pleased to help her write that. She has written another book called Death in Jekyll Island. Now, this is where she first became aware of Tiffany. And then once she became aware, because there was a restoration of she will tell you, a restoration of a Tiffany glass there. And that inspired her to write Shattered Dreams, a postcard of memories concerning Tiffany himself. These books will be on sale. We have a number of them. She has brought graciously several other of her own books here, which you can buy if you like afterwards. But you didn't come here to hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to introduce to you Donna Summers.
So have you done your homework? You're supposed to be coloring this. My girlfriend did this one for me and she framed it. You notice it's got that shiny look to it? This is part of your homework because we actually will talk about how these relate to the making of Tiffany windows. So enjoy yourselves. It's okay if you color. I taught at the University of Dayton. I understand nobody pays attention to you when you're talking. So, okay, so this is Louis Comfort Tiffany. This is a signature from the window I'm going to be talking about, the one that I was personally involved with. But is this a Tiffany window? Can you recognize? Yeah, it looks like one, doesn't it? It is a Tiffany window. And Tiffany windows have a certain look to them. And we're going to talk about that look today. This one has a really cool story with it. It was a window that was designed for a Philadelphia church, and in November of 2022, they decided that they were going to tear down the church. And so they did not realize they had Tiffany windows, and they bundled them off to the dump, basically. And so there was a gentleman who looked at the windows and said, I'll buy them. So he took them for $6,000, and he got a lot of other stuff with it too. He got church pews, he got tables from the church, he got balustrades, he got all kinds of other architectural aspects of the church. So that $6,000 is not representative of what he actually paid for the windows. When he bought the windows, he was rather surprised to see that they were coming in with a wrecking ball that very afternoon. So he had to pay an extra $15,000 to get the guy with the wrecking ball to salvage them. And then he spent $50,000 to repair the windows, and he sold them at an auction a year later for $100,000 a piece. That's not a bad return on investment, is it? So Tiffany often grabs the highest prices at different auctions. We've got some examples on the table where I left you the newspaper. This first window here was $276,000, and I do not know why the companion window to it was only $120,000. I'm not quite sure why that came out. I did try to research it, but I wasn't able to find any information about why it was so much less expensive.
Was it the same auction?
Yeah, same auction. They were not sold as a set, they were sold separately. And one of them got $276,000, which makes sense. And the other one got only $120,000, which doesn't make sense. So here's some lamps and what they're selling for. I think pound for pound, the lamps are selling for more than the windows. This window is currently the property of Chicago. It was a 2018 acquisition. It is up now. You can actually see it now. The interesting part about this was that no one knows how much this actually cost Chicago to buy it. So we've got 48 layered glass panels. You can count them. There are 48 layered glass panels. Most of them are relatively small up in here. And this piece of artwork is 23 feet by 18 feet, which makes it much taller than this ceiling here and pretty big. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the trees. We're going to talk about how he made this magical glass and how he managed to get things to look like they did. So there isn't really a lot of information about Louis Comfort Tiffany. There's a lot about what he actually has done. but there isn't a lot about him in his private life. And that's because he was a really nice guy. And really nice guys, you know, they just don't talk much about them. They talk about their work. So he was a talented painter at a very young age, meaning that he was like 18 when he won his first contest with his artwork. And his parents sent him to Europe to finish his education. And he went and saw the windows, the stained glass windows of Chartres and Notre Dame and other cathedrals, and fell in love with glass. This one is the rose window in Notre Dame. If you notice, this is a very deep blue and a very deep red. Those are very expensive glasses to create. Even nowadays, they're very expensive to create. This is the Chartres window. Notice that it has a lot more white in it. This is an older window. This is a newer window by a century, meaning one was made in the 1100s and one was made in the 1200s. Okay, but you can see that the glass is changing already. So we're going to cover Louis Comfort Tiffany from 3 points of view. We're going to talk about his artistic work. Then we're going to talk about him as a businessman. Then we're going to talk about him as an inventor, because this is the part that I found the most fascinating, was the inventor part. So he's best known for his paintings in glass, and he was the founder and president of Evolving Businesses focused on glassmaking, which shows his devotion to the glass. But if you look, you'll see there's a list in here that has 10 companies that he started up, and as each one of them developed to a certain extent, then he went and found funding for the next stage of his development of glass. So who was he as a person? Well, this is what I learned about him. He has a significant need to accomplish a goal, and his goal in life appeared to be to add beauty to the lives of others. And his sense of order enabled him to set priorities. He was very logical in his thinking. And so he was able to command a great number of projects all going on at once because he was so organized. His capacity for work enabled him to meet goals. He worked almost incessantly from morning till night and then some. And his insistence on quality earned him a lot of respect in the business community, and it meant that people trusted him when they were buying a window from him or they were buying a decoration from him. And his curiosity kept his work fresh. If you look at his work, it evolves over time. And you can see where he's learning how to put glass together, and he's learning how to make these windows, and then he comes to full blossom, and then he starts experimenting. So we'll be able to see some of that. There are some detractors who said that his father's wealth, his father was the owner of Tiffany's jewelry store, and they felt that his father's wealth enabled him to be a dilettante, so to speak. Although I never found any information about him being a dilettante. He sounds like a really hardworking guy who was very impressive when it came to translating his artistic talent into commercial objects. But he simply made the most of what he was able to do. So, as an inventor, over a 10-year span, he and the artisans that he employed recreated glass that had not been seen and produced since the 1100s. What I'm referring to is this type of glass. In this type of glass, the color is actually in the glass. In this type of glass, the color is painted on the glass. And that's where you get the difference in the vibrancy of it. So think about when we created cathedrals in the 1100s. And then if you look throughout Europe, when were the next group of cathedrals built? Never. Okay, so what do you think happened to all that glass making techniques and all yeah, it was all lost. So what we had going from the 1100s on is as soon as they stopped building the cathedrals, we lost the ability to put color into glass. And it was Tiffany who figured out how to do that. So if you look back and you look at the 1800s and the glass that was created in the 1800s, it's mostly clear or it's been painted on. Sometimes it was opaque, but it wasn't ever colored. So if you go back and you look at glass probably prior to the 1890s, you're going to find that it's got one color, clear. So in the 1880s, we saw a big revival in the United States of building churches. And because we were traveling to Europe more often, we decided that we wanted them to look like the cathedrals that we have in Europe. And so they wanted to create the glass to decorate it. And it was Tiffany who, it took him 10 years to figure out how to put color into glass. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Patience.
Patience, yep. Oh, and then this, I thought this was important. Everything I found out about his family life was that he was a devoted father and husband. So when he was home, he was really home with his kids. These are two quotes that I found about Tiffany, and I liked them. Paintings should not hurt the eyes. That to me just says it all, doesn't it? And color is to the eye what music is to the ear. So this is one of his early windows, and you can see in it that there is glass learning. Like this is called ripple glass or drapery glass because it looks like clothing that is draping. But you'll notice that there's not a lot of color in it. It only has this little spot of red. By the way, that's a Tiffany trademark, is he'll put a little spot of red glass somewhere in each of his windows. And the reason he only uses a little spot of it is because red glass is very difficult to make. You have to use gold and you have to fire it twice. And that's the only way you can make the red color is to use true gold. Now you can make pinks and things like that, and you'll see some windows coming up that have a lot of pink in them, but the true red that was his trademark has to be made with gold. So Tiffany started out with paintings. Then he moved into jewelry he made a lot of jewelry for his father. Then he got into pottery, and then he got into this art glass. By the way, these are owned by a woman in Middletown. Yeah. It was amazing to meet her. And then he got into leaded glass lamps. And then he did the stained glass window. So he evolved over his career. And what I like is the idea that he grasped the exquisite power of paintings in glass. Being able to take glass and turn it into a painting. So we've talked about some of this already. This is the full-fledged religious cathedral building revival that was going on in the United States that really pushed him to do windows. And he liked the fact that stained glass windows bathed their congregants in a warm glow specifically selected to evoke heavenly light. So if you've ever sat in the glow of a stained glass window, it comes and it envelops you in color. And Tiffany sought to beautify as many ecclesiastical structures and homes as he could. What makes Tiffany windows unique is that they're brilliant, they're rich in texture and color, and different from anything that anyone else has ever seen, before or since. This church has got 101 Tiffany windows, and it's in Dubuque, Iowa. It's in the Methodist Church in Dubuque, Iowa, and it's got 101 Tiffany windows. That makes it the 5th largest collection of Tiffany windows in the world. And the church was built in 1896, and it was built within a year, which is rather a big surprise considering it's got all these windows in it. We're going to see this picture again But this particular picture is David Set Singers Before the Lord, and it is one of the windows in the United Methodist Church. But you see there's a guy with the harp here, and there's this gentleman here who's got what looks like some kind of baton to beat a drum, something like that. So this is my little addition to this. My mother is from Chicago, and she used to take me to the Chicago Library. And as a child, I would lay on the floor under this dome, and nobody ever told me it was a Tiffany. So this dome would barely fit in this room. It's enormous. And it's got 30,000 pieces of glass in 243 sections. And it's 38 feet in diameter.
Is it clear?
No, it's blue. It's blue. It's like that. It's my favorite color on the planet. It's also called Tiffany blue. And this is all marble, little marble chips that have been taken and put into mosaics. It's a beautiful room. It's an absolutely beautiful room. And then this one is a window in Dayton, Ohio. It's the most easily accessible Tiffany window in the Dayton-Cincinnati area. There are multiple windows in the Dayton and Cincinnati area. All you have to do is type in online, Tiffany windows, Dayton, Cincinnati, and it comes up with a really nice list, which is why I don't have it on a scorecard here for you. But this window, you don't have to get permission to come in and see. You don't have to ask them to open the church on a weekday for you. So, how did Tiffany get started in windows? How did he advertise that he does windows? Because a lot of these windows go into homes. They don't all go into churches. So he started out, and his father was having a pavilion at the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago in 1893. And he said, "Dad, can I stick a cathedral in there?" And he did. He took half the space and he built a church inside the pavilion. And that was really his launch, and that's how he showed people his windows. Because how can you describe something so different? How can you say that it's not paintings on glass, but it's color in glass? People have to see it to believe it. So while he was there, he formed a strong friendship with Siegfried Bing, who was sent by the French government to scope out what the new artists were doing in the United States and in the rest of the world. And the two men got along really well, and they decided to open a gallery in France. And so Bing returned to Paris and renamed his gallery, and he renamed it the Salon de l'Art Nouveau. Ever heard of the Art Nouveau movement? There it is. There it is. That's where it all began. And Tiffany, when you go over to France and you talk to people about Art Nouveau, they call it Le Style Tiffany, the styles of Tiffany. It's not called Art Nouveau. Now this is a list of the companies that Tiffany created to create his glass. And you'll notice that as soon as one of them folds, he starts another one. A lot of these had to do with one of the companies burnt down, so that was the end of that company. And others were where he changed direction within them, like the first one here, Tiffany and Company. He was an interior decorator. And then he decided he didn't want to be that anymore, so he changed it to a glass making company. And then these are some glass furnaces where he actually made the glass. And Kokomo Opalescent Glass Company was one that he used from 1890 to the early 1900s. It's in Kokomo, Indiana, and it's still in operation today, and they have the Tiffany recipe books. And so when you look here, at the glass that I've got, and I hope you do take the time to come over here and take a look at these. But these pieces that are labeled Kokomo glass are actually made out of the Tiffany recipes. And don't do what I just did, because I just cut myself. Please put on the gloves before you pick up the glass. Anyway, there's multiple pieces over here on the light board, so you can see what they look like. This guy made this window. Do you see that it doesn't look like a Tiffany window? And I don't know whether you can tell, but he painted the red. And he was the one who wanted to put Tiffany out of business. Yeah, he was 20 years older than Tiffany. Tiffany went to him and apprenticed with him for a short period of time and easily surpassed him as far as his ability to work with glass. And it really made him angry. So the early development of opalescent glass, which is what colored glass is called, opalescent glass, was credited to this gentleman here, John Lafarge. And Tiffany was the one who discovered how to put colors in glass rather than just paint it on. What Tiffany discovered was that you needed some natural stones to put it in there, or natural materials to put it in there. Like the blue is made with lazuli ground up, and the green is citrons ground up, and the gold I already told you about. So it was Tiffany who was doing that. And Lafarge went and patented that process. And Tiffany, rather than rise to this patent problem, turned around by patenting the window making process. So that put Lafarge right out of business. Okay, so here's the 3 different types of glass. And you can see what a Tiffany window looks like. Doesn't it just pop right out at you? So this is the medieval glass. This is the glass that happened in between where they're just painting on white, clear glass. And this is what Tiffany was able to develop. Isn't that amazing? And it doesn't matter how big or small it is, you all recognize what a Tiffany is, don't you?
Can I ask a question about the first one?
Yes?
The medieval one? What was the process for that one?
The same thing that Tiffany was doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So Tiffany would make, and I've got some pictures coming up, but we'll answer your question really in a short version. We'll get to the longer version. So he'd make a cauldron full of clear glass, and he'd stir it up and he'd get it heated up to a certain temperature. And different colors of glass requires different temperatures. And then he would put in the crunched up material, and he would get that rock to melt and join with the glass and stir it up. And then he would pour it in what looked to me like baking sheets. I went and visited Kokomo Glass, and they have his original works there. And they made sheets of glass on just these little cookie sheets, little pieces at a time. Now they make them on 6-foot cookie sheets. You're welcome. Okay, so he was first and foremost an artist, and he often created his own sketches for the windows. Clara Driscoll was one of his chief artists, and she is credited for doing a lot of his lamps. He's got other people who did his windows, but often he would do the preliminary sketches. And he preferred natural scenes, flowers, mountains, and streams. So if you see a Tiffany and it's got a flower, a mountain, or a stream in it, it's probably most likely had some influence from him. And the studio maintained a book showing all the possible windows that you could possibly want. That's why I wanted you to remember that one of David set Singers Before the Lord, because you're going to see it coming up again. And the design is approved by the customer. So once we do that, you've got your designs that were approved by the customer, and nobody's coloring. I tell you, I'm disappointed. So the first thing you have to do is you have to color this drawing now that it's been approved and it's been broken down into little sheets. And once that happens, it's expanded to a full scale. And this is a gentleman who's taking it to a life-size figure. And the cartoons, that's what they're called. Cartoons are translated onto a piece of glass. So, at the risk of cutting myself again, I don't know whether you can see this on here, but it's been sketched on here, a couple of cuts. And then the glass selection. Now this would be the hardest part of the process. Imagine working in a place that doesn't have any electricity. And you're wanting to create this window, and you're in New York, where it's cloudy most of the time. And you're in a dark room, and you've got to match glass. Now, what they used to do was they would run outside on a sunny day, and they would hold the glass up to the sun and see what it would look like with light coming through it. So the glass choice process was very, very difficult. And they would lay out the pieces and fill in the blanks. Now, Tiffany's studio had a library of over 5,000 colors and hues. They were identified and stored by code and number. From what I understand, Clara Driscoll knew most of the numbers and would say, I want 10W40. The pieces of glass were secured to a sheet of clear glass or a glass easel with beeswax. And they would normally prop these up in front of windows, but of course if you have very little light coming in, and I'm sure they didn't clean their windows that often. And later in her letters to her mother, she complains about how once they got electricity installed, they would hold it up to an electric light bulb, but it would change the glass because it wasn't sunlight. So, most of the glass windows have a frame that holds the glass into place. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So we have to hold the glass, and we're going to use lead channels in order to do that. We're going to lay out the panels, and we're going to create the faces and the legs and the feet and the arms and the hands with a separate process. The faces were created on ceramic. They were not created out of glass because he could not get the right colors for the facial expressions. So, on one of my visits to the Middletown, I'm trying to think of what her name, Beau Reeve. They were very nice, and they let me have pieces of the Tiffany window that they were working on. And if you get a chance afterwards, come up and feel these, because this is very, very heavy. These two pieces weigh a lot, and they're Tiffany. And if you see what we use today, it's very lightweight. Tiffany was building these things so that they would last forever. The other thing that I found interesting that I learned from Beau Reeve is that Tiffany used copper that was very, very thin. And you're going to feel these thin pieces up here and say, well, this feels pretty thin. It feels pretty small. But a real piece of Tiffany, oops, it's gone. Yeah. The real piece of Tiffany is even lighter. It's even more fragile. And they stuck it on with beeswax. And then we use copper wires to secure the stained glass panels to the window frame. And then we get to the insulation. Now with the soldering of the glass and the use of lead channels, that was primarily the man's work. So once the window glass is selected, Clara Driscoll's work would be over for her department because it was felt that only men could handle the heat to solder. All right, so there were three great stained glass designers at the turn of the century. John Lafarge, who you've already seen, Maitland Armstrong, who I'm going to introduce you to in a minute, and Louis Comfort Tiffany, who we've been talking about. And two of these artists contributed works to the Faith Chapel, Jekyll Island, Georgia. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time down in Georgia on Jekyll Island. And while I'm down there during the winter months, I get involved with the Historical Society, the Preservation Society. And this is one of the projects that I got involved with, was working on a Tiffany window. So I'm going to talk to you about that. This is Jekyll Island. It's a club. It was an exclusive club for millionaires. And the reason that they chose that was because during the late 1800s, there was a lot of anarchists at work. And these anarchists would try to murder people who were wealthy. And so the wealthy went to places where they felt safe. And one of the places they felt safe was Jekyll Island because it's 6.5 miles from any land. And so they could hide there. In essence, they could hide there. So Louis Comfort Tiffany visited, being wealthy, he visited the island multiple times. Whoops. And the reason I have a question mark there is because he's visited the island so many times that it was difficult to keep track of when he was there. And so I got conflicting information, including one that said he was there in 2021 for the 100th anniversary of his window. And I was going, who made that mistake? Who actually published that? This is the chapel, and this is the window we're talking about here. Now, in this picture, it's covered with protective plastic because the window isn't there. The window's being worked on. All right, so let's talk about the Joseph Stickey memorial window. This is a beautiful window. This is a stunning window. And when he had it built, he wanted to put himself, Mr. Stickey wanted to put himself in the picture. And he's humbling himself before the Christ child. It is a stunningly beautiful window. It was designed by Maitland Armstrong and his daughter Helen Armstrong. And it's called The Adoration of the Christ Child. There is some rumor that it was built by Tiffany's studio. Doesn't it look like a Tiffany? It doesn't look exactly like a Tiffany, but it looks very close to a Tiffany. So, Tiffany's stained glass window replaced an existing window on the west side of the chapel, which is really kind of sad because the west side of the chapel doesn't get any sun for the morning church services. So I went to this chapel. They held services up until this year. They held services there. And I went there for almost 15 years before I realized there was a Tiffany at the other end of the chapel, because it was always dark, because we would have services at 8:30 in the morning when the sun's coming up in the east, lighting the Maitland window, and instead we would all just walk out, file past the Tiffany. So when I was asked by I guess I'll call him my boss down there, he's a preservationist, and they got funding to take the Tiffany window out, clean it up, and put it back in. And that's when I got involved with the window. In 1921, the Ecclesiastical Division of Louis Comfort Tiffany Studios designed and installed the Faith Chapel window titled David Set Sinners Before the Lord. It's an 11.5-foot tall window with glass of radiant brilliance. It truly is radiantly brilliant. You're going to see some examples of it in just a minute. And it's widely regarded as one of the most vibrant and most important of the more than 26,000 windows that the Tiffany Studios created. Can you imagine making 26,000 windows in 20 years? I mean, just get your hands wrapped around that. 20 years, 26,000 windows. And he never made anything small, okay? They were always big windows. This is an original picture of what the David set Singers Before the Lord. And I want you to take a close look at it, because can you see that he's got some kind of gold necklaces here? And this staff is gold, and this is gold. In a few minutes, you're going to see how the change in the windows when it's cleaned. So the window is to commemorate the life of Frederick Gilbert Bourne, who was a beloved member of the Jekyll Island Club. He was also the 4th president, and he was the president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company. It was installed on Easter Sunday of 1921. This is the arch that goes over the window. And we know it's David sitting at the window because he's got the harp, and he's got the menorah and the scroll and the lion, and those are all things that are used to identify David. You notice the window, how there's very little color here and very little color here? You're going to watch that change in a little bit. This is one of the very few windows that Tiffany actually signed. And by signed, what he did was he took a brand and pressed it into the window glass and actually burnt his signature into it. Usually, if they're labeled at all, they're labeled Tiffany Studios, not Tiffany. He would only sign it a window if he had designed the window as in done all the drawings for it. Now this one he probably did not, because it was David Set Singers Before the Lord. And that's not a mountain or a flower or something like that, something from nature. So he either had a personal connection to it by designing it or selecting the glass for it. Now remember, we talked about how difficult it was to select the glass, so this would have been a big part of the project. Or he knew the people who were involved in the window. He was a personal friend of Bourne. So it doesn't surprise us at all, since he was such a close personal friend of Bourne, that he was involved in the window and signed it. Okay, this is a funny story. We don't even have to read this all. I'm going to tell you the funny story. So, did you notice that this window is slightly different than the window that we saw earlier? This guy has got his harp, and before he was sitting down here, and they didn't have a separate panel for the window, and they didn't have this group of people. Okay, so David set singers before the Lord. Check out these people. Do any of them look like singers? This is a very pretty girl right here. This is a page. This is obviously a religious leader. This guy is the only one who could be considered a musician. And this one is reading a scroll. And David is going with his hand up in the air. So what we really think it is, and if you talk to the Library of Congress, which I did, the window is actually showing a scene from King David promising that his successor would be Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. You remember in your Bible study? Okay, this of course means that King David bypasses his only legitimate son, Adoniah, and the priest in the figure is probably Zadok. The prophet is Nathan, the pretty warm woman is Bathsheba, and the remaining figure is thought to be Bediah. So basically, the people of the church had to decide between, are we going to say that we've got this window commemorating putting a illegitimate child ahead of the true heir to the throne? I mean, how does that play? Not particularly well, I wouldn't think, especially when you consider the kind of audience that we had here. We had a whole bunch of millionaires. So if you ask anybody down in Jekyll Island, what they will tell you is that it is David that set singers before the Lord, and they chose it because Bourne's career was with the Singer Sewing Machine Company. That's pretty wild, huh? Another alternative was that he had a fine singing voice and was a member of the choir. Tiffany, who was 73 years old at the time that it was installed, never stated what the window was supposed to represent. So if you go down there, it will tell you this safer, cleaner story rather than the true story. Okay, so here we go. We're going to take this window out. The difficult part about taking this window out is the fact that it's literally taking a stained glass window out that has no frame on it. Because of the way they built this particular window and the way that they put it in to the stonework around the window meant that when we took it out, it was highly flexible. Yeah, and we didn't want it to flex all over the backyard. So what we did was we put up the boards and leaned them into the boards. So I was in charge of photographing.
How did you find somebody to do that?
There's only one place in the country, and they're out of Minneapolis. Yeah, so it cost us $150,000 to have it done, and the Friends of Jekyll Island raised $75,000 to have it done, and then the government provided the rest of it. So when you look at this piece, this is after we've taken off there was protective glass on the inside. It was actually plastic that had yellowed. So you're already beginning to see that the colors are looking brighter, especially here. Now this piece has been replaced. What we did was during the time that the windows were being worked on in our workshop, what we did was we put a plastic facsimile up to keep the weather out and to give people the impression of the window. The plastic doesn't look so good, does it? So there's another picture of it. This is how it rode in there. Now see that there is no frame on the window? And we only took it about, maybe a quarter of a mile to our workshop. And what we were talking about most about it was that surely there had to be a better way of transporting it rather than having it laying on a piece of plastic or bubble wrap on top of a piece of plywood. But that was the only way we could think of getting them through without breaking anything. So this is my boss down there. He's always laughing, which is a good thing considering the projects he's had to do. And I took the picture from this angle so you could actually see some of the glass. And I'll have this up here if you want to come up and see them later. But this is called drapery glass here, where it looks like it's got folds in it. And this is called favrile glass, where it looks like it has opalescence in it. And then this is really neat glass. What they do to make that is you put several different colors together and you swirl them together just like you were mixing cake. Okay, so we're going to talk about Tiffany the inventor, the person who came up with a way of doing these windows. And you got to realize that before this, nobody knew how they did the windows in the 1100s. So it was definitely a hit or miss kind of thing. So he created copper foil. He realized that lead channels versus thin copper coil held in place with beeswax was lighter weight, and the copper foil would make it so that it looked like there weren't any divisions, like it was just an outline. Whereas if you look at the pictures that have the heavy channel work. That doesn't look as pretty as what you would think because it's as wide as your thumb. And then he used layers of glass. Now this was a surprise to me from what I could understand at first when people were describing how they used layers of glass. What I thought was that they took different sheets of glass and put it together. Like this is 2 layers of glass. And that's not how Tiffany did it. Tiffany did layers of glass where he needed it. So if you look at some of the pictures that I'm going to show you, you'll see that there's a little section here and a little section there where he's done layers of glass, and he may have 5 layers of stacked glass at that. So Tiffany windows vary in thickness, and they have a strange way of looking, because if you look at them when they're laying flat on a table and there's no light coming through them, you can't see the layers and it just looks black. You're going to see that in a little bit. But when the light shines through it, it's kind of like going through multiple layers of glass. The color is allowed through. So the other thing that he did was he did enamel painted faces. He traced lines in the enamel to suggest faces, fingers, eyes, and toes. It's fired first at a higher temperature, and then it's covered with a layer of enamel, which was fired at a lower temperature. That was a new method of doing faces. And then cold painting wasn't used on our window, but it's a method of painting glass on cold glass. So Tiffany made up new glass. Not only did he color it, but he also made it up as he went. He wanted drapery glass, so he made rippled glass. He wanted glass that looked like leaves, so he made feather glass. So the first thing that you're going to see with the types of glass is that he's got Fabril glass, which he patented in 1880, and it's derived from the French term fabril, or handcrafted. And Fabril glass is distinguished by a brilliant or deeply toned colors. Think about a peacock. And if you look at a window that's been done by Tiffany, you'll see it kind of glows like a peacock does. So opalescence refers to the changing color of the glass under transmitted light. Drapery glass is heavily folded glass. Streamer glass is glass with a pattern. Ripple glass it looks like waves on the water. Fracture glass is little pieces that are tossed into clear glass. And ring model is a modeling that looks like mold. And if you want to see any of these, we've got them right over here. It's easier to look at them than it is for me to describe them. So we're going to start with the modeled glass. Can you see that it looks like mold? So that's a Tiffany glass. And then we have confetti glass, which takes little pieces of glass and melts them into a clearer glass. Then we have streamer glass, which I have multiple examples of. I'll just hold up 2 of them. Streamer glass has got black lines in it. Looks like leaves and twigs on a tree. So you're welcome to come up and look at any of these afterwards. And I think it'll help explain what the different glass types are. In the meantime, I'm going to hope that all these stay up here. Whee! Okay, good. Meantime, I'm going to show you what these windows look like and show you what each of these different glasses look like on a big Tiffany window. Okay, so the copper foil. They go around each of these pieces, and you notice that it's not as neat and tidy as what you see on today's stained glass. For instance, if you look at this, it looks very precision, very straight lines. And that's really nice, but that wasn't Tiffany's style, and the reason it wasn't his style is because he found it more interesting to have it come through awkward pieces of glass. Notice this one's really small, and this one's wider than this one. This one's got a different coloring at the bottom of it. He thought that was cool. So he would choose the glass based on what he thought looked good. And then he put the copper around it so that it didn't take up as much space as a channel would. And besides, you couldn't do this kind of work with a channel, could you? So here's the layers of glass. Can you see how thick this piece is right here? That means that there's two pieces under there, and here it is thicker here. Whoops.
You'll have to shrink it.
I know, I did this the last time I gave a presentation. There we go. Hey, here's one that shows how dark the face is. When you look at that, that's because there's no light coming through it. That's the whole problem with that, is there's no light coming through it. But you can see the layers of glass. You can see how this is all wrinkly. And he would pick a piece of glass and he'd go, this is so cool, where can we use it? Enamel painted faces, once again, are black when you see them laying down flat, which leads you to believe that this window is going to be way too ugly when it gets put up. There's some light coming through them. There's another shot of the menorah. This one I took because I like the feather quality of the wings. This is drapery and ripple and fevriel glass. Do you see how shiny this glass is? It kind of looks like a peacock, doesn't it? Yeah. That isn't because there's light above it, that's because there's light coming through it. Here's that other piece that has that thickness to it. So you look at the back of a Tiffany window and it's anything but smooth. It's got all kinds of bumps and ribbles and rills, and it just looks like somebody put it all together and hoped for the best. They seriously, that's what it looks like. So looking at a Tiffany window from the back side is not a pleasant experience. You have to turn around and look at it from the front. These prongs here are what holds a Tiffany window to the window. What they would do was, when they installed them, they would take the window, and that would be either wood, or normally it would be some sort of concrete with rebar in it. And they would attach these to the back of the window at the height that the rebar was. Let me see if I can find a picture and explain this. There we go. Do you see these pieces of rebar? You'll notice that they're throughout the window, and inevitably people will say, well, they cut the window there. No, that's a support piece. That's a piece of rebar that goes into the concrete on each side and holds the window, and it's connected with those little twist ties, which amazed me that the little twist ties would be able to hold the window. So these are not individual window pieces. That's one big glass panel held into place on those. See, you can see it, they don't have them here. There we go. Okay, so here's the window in the before. We had planned on 5 months to restore this window. It was actually in such good condition it took us less than a month. It took us a month with some Windex. It was actually, there was no repair to any of the solder joints or anything like that. It was so well made. But he kind of lived that kind of life. He wanted it to last forever. He wanted it to be like the cathedrals of France, where they just stayed and they're permanent. So let's look at some interesting findings about this. The interior sheet of laminated glass was comprised of a piece of plastic between two pieces of glass. That means we had 3 thick layers that were bolted to the front of the picture. So when you were inside the building and you were looking out the window, there were 3 pieces of yellowed glass with 1 piece of plastic in between them, and it was against the window. When we took that off, it was so dramatic that even the dirty window it just looked gorgeous. It just absolutely looked gorgeous. So that they did not put that back up. They made a management decision to leave the window inside unguarded. So now you can only get into the building if you are there between 1 and 4 o'clock when the docent is there. And then this one was the most hurtful. There was a layer of beige oil-based house paint coating the outside of the window. It had been put there in response to a complaint that the window was too bright. Can you believe that? Now this is a church, so this is like you don't go there in the afternoon. But they would say that the window was too bright and it was annoying to them. So we had to take that off. So I've already talked about this, the window frame and the rebar were left in place. The window was very flexible and could have popped out of its frame. We used 7 people to turn it upside down, each window panel, just to make sure. And one day we had a curator from some museum come in and she wanted to help. And she pushed on the center of one of the windows. And it was like, everybody caught their breath and went, oh my God, what's this woman doing? So it was very, very fragile. And then we had multiple layers of protective plexiglass, including the original yellow textured glass covered the exterior. And when the 3/8-inch bubbled seated glass was removed, the window became even more transparent and more beautiful. Currently, we only have the original Kokomo ribbed glass, which we were able to salvage, which was original to the protective covering that went on the window back in 1921. And then we put on a piece of museum glass that's nearly bulletproof. So now the window looks like this. Isn't that beautiful? Look at this. Look at her dress. And look at their faces. I was able to get in there. I took this picture at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun was coming through it. We were waiting for the best moment. And it was just so incredible. This window just glows, absolutely glows. Look at his necklace.
Wow. So how do you clean it now?
With Windex.
So just windows?
Yeah, Windex and a ladder.
Cool.
Look at her dress. And there's his signature red. Could you even see that in the other picture? No. So what makes it easy to identify Tiffany windows? I challenge you to disagree with any of these. Tiffany windows draw the observer into them. How many of you went, ah, when you saw the one of the New Hampshire hillside with the waterfall in the middle? It's an ah picture, right? And Tiffany windows contain many thousands of pieces of glass. If you look at his windows, and I hope you take the time to scroll through this before you leave today, and take a look and study them. They've got little tiny pieces of glass all the way up to big sheets of glass. The contours of the glass have a rhythm and a flow. The picture flows together. Remember the 2 that you saw side by side and I said the one sold for less than the other? Could you see where they were meant to be together? It didn't matter how far apart you would have put them, whether they're side by side or together, they flowed together. Intricate and complex cuts of glass. It's very difficult to make a concave cut of glass. And if you look at his glassware, he cuts it anywhere he wants. He had really talented glass cutters. We had stacking of multiple pieces of glass. That's very rare to see in anybody's work. And after 1900, we had more copper foil leading is used. And paint is very, very, very rarely used. Remember I told you that Lafarge would paint? Not Tiffany, not so Tiffany. So this is what a normal Tiffany signed window looks like. It'll say Tiffany Studios, New York. On it, this is the window that's in Woodland Cemetery. These are pictures of the Woodland Cemetery. I went to the glass Beau Reve And I was talking to the woman about the glass and about Tiffany windows. And she said, well, then I said, I want to go to the Woodland Cemetery because I remember that window being very, very beautiful. She goes, well, why don't you just come in our basement because it's downstairs right now. And I was going, okay, cool, I'm liking this. So these are some pictures I took. And you can tell that this is a slightly later window because it's got more control over the copper and the leading that's putting it together. Then I went up to Kokomo. This is the original heating area where each of these little beehive, he would have a pot in there that would be stirred, and he would brick it up, and it would just heat and heat and heat and heat and heat until it got to the right temperature, and then he'd pull the bricks out. This is called the hallway of glass. There are 1,000 pieces of glass there. Remember, Tiffany had 5,000 pieces of glass. This is the sources that I have. And that's it.